Okay, so here we are in Cinema 4D, and this is the basic scene. Unfortunately, I'm not going to be able to explain this that well because I didn't really write down all the steps that I used. So I'm going to kind of deconstruct this. How did I figure this out as well? I knew I was going to need to start with a circle. I'm going to have to start with a spline and to use some sort of a coil, or in this case a helix, and wrap that around a circle, put a sweep around that, but it's not quite that simple. See, first of all, I got my circle, got my helix. That's the basic shape of the helix. Now I wrapped a sweep around that. Now everything's, of course, pointing towards the sweep wrap, which is a deformer. Now, I ran across the sweep wrap by accident in some sort of tutorial, Cinema 4D tutorial, and I thought, you know what? I wonder what it would look like if I used a spline wrap for this thing. All right, and one of the benefits to this spline wrap is kind of like an outer coating, or like if you wrapped gift wrap paper or bubble wrap around something. It just, adheres to the particular shape. And of course, in this case, it is a helix. So I think I started with this many points and then just upped it as far as I could go to get a very densely packed helix. So I might turn off this sweep wrap. I'll just actually just get rid of it altogether. This is the basic helix that I started off with. And I had to do, figure out, okay, how much do I want this to wrap or twist around itself? Because otherwise, you can't get it around a full circle and have it look decent. Now at this point, it kind of looks like a garden hose. I'm just giving you an idea. That's kind of what the angle that I started this thing off. As you can see, that's kind of, alright, that's how I started it, and I would need to end it, basically do a 360 spiral, kind of like a slinky. I was thinking this is kind of like putting a slinky. And once I had this, it's like, okay, this works, this looks like what I want. And what I also had to squeeze it a bit. I had to scale this thing in a bit because I didn't want it to be a fat donut. I wanted it to be kind of like a magnet, which is much more flat, but still kind of keep it round enough. Not a full circle, kind of slightly oval-like. Well, obviously, after creating these two things, I had to put a sweep on here, and just do the things I needed to do with that, just to make that look right. Capping, ending scale, rotation. It just had more to do with the thickness of the coil itself. You can't really see too much with it. End growth. You can see kind of where it ends there. Cross section comes together, forms like a slinky coming together. Now the spline wrap, I obviously had to select this as a property, select the circle itself, and then once I selected the circle, then it wrapped around this thing, created the radius or the thickness of the tubes of the coil, the tubular coil. So you can make it, I can make it bigger and looser or more compact, which this is more the case. Too much with that. I didn't really have to do too much else with it. Fit the spline, obviously, in terms of the deformer. I didn't play around with the size of the scale too much, or the rotation, all that, the thickness or the denseness of the weave or of the helix is contained in here. So, anyway, once I wrapped that around, it looked pretty good. I mean, it pretty much did what I wanted. The only thing about it is it's very loose. I wanted it to look like you had another coil underneath, intersecting into other coils, so it's not, you know, through itself. Because when you render this, you can kind of see, and you can see through it, which is not what I wanted. I wanted there to be a core to this thing, as if it's a very thick, dense coil. So I just created a second one, so then it intercuts and intermingles, intersects with the rest. I just basically made a copy of it, stuck it in here, and I think I shrunk this one down a little bit, the one that's underneath, so it's not, so it looks like it's kind of popping through a bit, but I didn't want it to be the same size, obviously. So yeah, that's 7.4. Helix here, 7.5. Interesting. Anyway, that's how I did that. Now, the reason why I have a torus in here, I just made a torus, colored it similar. You know, it's kind of like a donut, because I wanted it to look like there's a thick core in between, so you can't see a lot of light or light cutting through in the final composite. And again, this looks like a dense kind of magnetic coil. The texture I use is pretty similar to the final thing. I did a few more manipulations in the final scene in the warehouse, but basically it's just a metal copper texture that came with Cinema 4D, and just tried to get that to the color I wanted. I had a little bit of a bump, a slight bump, so it's not a total because if you had a coil or copper piping this big, there's going to be some sort of bump to it. It's not going to be totally smooth, but it was just a minor bump with enough reflectance where it looks like it is copper as opposed to like a plastic tubing. Again, I don't know what this spline circle is here. I suppose that's not part of the torus. I don't know what that is. Anyway, it's not really important. First, I had to create the warehouse. Let me just show you the coils in the warehouse. So that's kind of what the placement in the final scene with the two coils would be. I think I just made a coil instance of it. I think I made an instance of it. But anyway, we'll get to that in a little bit. But now I'm just going to explain about some of the basic structures in here. Honestly, I'm not the best modeler in the world, and I figure why create some of this stuff from scratch when I can just use models already produced. So I found models, gantries, railings, stuff like that. And I should say, before I go to anything else, a lot of this I got from free downloads from Pixel Lab. They have some really great different models, particularly of big scenes, wind tunnels and warehouses and stuff like that. And they give you the textures and all that stuff. Yeah, so kind of a shout out to Pixel Lab here, because they're really great with offering free scenes. You just have to sign up with them, and you can download your Cinema 4D scenes and different models and objects. Anyway, that's where I kind of picked up some of these things. Alright, this is the whole scene as I originally built it. Of course, you won't see any of this from the outside. The camera, is showing everything on the inside. Let's put this to the line so you can see. Just basically, it's just a rectangle, and I added a bunch of subdivisions or bevels to smooth that out and to kind of have a rounded you know, rectangular warehouse room. But again, you wouldn't see most of that through the regular camera. You can just see the kinds of textures that I have on there for the cement, for the floor. I think I probably created this, not these fluorescent tubes, because those will act as my lights. And this I created here, the walls that would hold the coils. Of course, you got your door, which I created. Some of the great stuff here, though, is the textures that are already contained in Cinema 4D. These are very, very basic textures. I may not even have any on the wall there, but you can see some of them down here. Anyway, that is my basic scene. Now, if you go to this, this is going to be our full scene, and I bet you I have this set to global illumination. Yeah, rendering shadow mask. This would take a long time to render because I've got this set at a global illumination. But I can kind of let that go in the background there. Here are my coil walls, and basically anything that I have here, any duplicates are basically instances of that original object. So you don't have to produce it twice. It helps cut down on render time and just be able to move your scene around. Mainly what I just wanted to show you with this, because you don't need to go through everything here, is the lighting. The lighting is extremely important to this, to sell this whole scene and to match me in my scene in front of the green screen wall, just to try to match all this lighting and the lighting that would end up coming from the glow from these coils. That's kind of my main overhead light, and that's kind of where in the studio where my light was for the green screen, overhead, kind of towards the back. This just matched wonderfully, I think, for the kind of materials and textures that I was using. Of course, a lot of metal, rough metal, polished, so forth. Steel, bumps. The bumps really kind of sold that, particularly on the floor here. What I'm going to try and do is turn off the global illumination and bring down anti-aliasing a lot, so I can at least quickly render this scene. I'll just let this go for a little bit, see how long it takes.